All right, welcome. Today we're going to be taking apart a Dell XPS 13 7390 2-in-1 laptop computer. This has the 10th gen i7 and it is a 13-inch screen. So to start out, we're going to need a Torx T5. And just be advised, we're going to be leaving the display assembly complete. And I would also recommend, unless you have a lot of computer repair experience, to consider buying that display assembly as a complete unit instead of trying to just replace any of the components yourself. Alright, so we will go ahead and remove all of the little Torx screws. Alright, once you make sure you've got all the screws out, we need to separate the bottom case from the palm rest. And we're going to do that right here on the little seam. So I've already kind of got this one started. They don't leave any place to really get a gap, so you'll just have to take the spudger or another small non-scratch instrument and just work it in there until you can get it in the crack. And easiest way I found is to use your fingers or fingernails to hold pressure, spreading pressure, and then just work the spudger around, the edges, and it's gonna pop, 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 and then eventually you'll just pop the whole thing loose. Okay, so we got a good look on the inside of the laptop, and let me adjust. All right, so it doesn't look like it has any real upgradable parts. I see a large, looks like a large fan heatsink assembly, a large flat battery, but I'm not seeing a place for RAM, and it's also possible the SSD is also integrated, so we will find out. And the first thing we are going to disconnect and remove is the battery. And so I'm not sure which connector, it's probably this one, but we're going to kind of loosen the battery first, and then we will figure out which connector goes to it. And it looks like we can switch now to a small Phillips bit. So I'm going to grab a 2.0. So 1.5 or 2.0 Phillips bit will probably remove most of the other items in the laptop. So looks like a Torx T5 for the exterior, and then either a 2 or a 1.5 for the smaller Phillips screws. They both feel about the same. The 1.5 feels just a little bit too small, and the 2.0 feels a little bit too big. But either will work. Alright, and I will also... Okay, so that connector is also a Torx. Okay, and then once you have the... Okay, there we go. So we'll just make sure that we have those screws out for the battery. Looks like a couple more on top. And remember to switch back to the right bit. Okay, so finish taking the 1.5s out. Give the battery a little bit of a wiggle, and yeah, it looks like it was that connector. So the connector just is basically held on by that Torx screw, and the little port has like a ton of little pins on it, so it looks like they're all either positive or negative. There's only 2 leads on the battery. Okay, so looks like we have access to our interface board. The touchpad looks like it's definitely replaceable, just a few screws up here. The keyboard, I see a lot of screws on, so the keyboard definitely looks like you can replace it. It's not held in by melted plastic like some of these other makers. So I guess now we'll go ahead and separate the display assembly before we remove the motherboard. So I'm looking at the top here. It looks like as soon as we disconnect the bracket and the two cables coming from probably the webcam and the touchscreen assembly, we should be able to remove the screen from the palm rest. It'll make it easier to remove the motherboard. But it looks like at this point you can remove either without having to remove the other. So we'll just go for the screen assembly first. Okay. So this type of connector, you just pop it straight up and off. So just use your fingernail, lift it up and off. And as most laptops are nowadays, these are held in place by some tape. So we'll carefully peel back that tape. And then thread it out of the little retainers there. Okay, so that side of the screen assembly is free, and we'll just continue on with this cable. So same deal, pull it out of the tape, pull the retainer, and then follow it all the way to the display assembly there. So since this is a 2-in-1, I can open up the screen assembly all the way. Most laptops, if they're not a convertible, the screen has to be in a completely open position to be able to clear the hinges from the palm rest assembly usually. So we're going to switch to a 2.5 and remove the remaining 4 hinge screws. Then we'll carefully separate the screen from the palm rest assembly. And there's our complete screen. So we'll go ahead and set that aside for now. All right, so looking on top here, I'm not sure what the tape here is for, but I don't feel like there's anything underneath that has to be removed first. I could be wrong. So what I think I'll do now, since we're gonna go ahead and remove the fan assembly from the motherboard, just looking at some of these screws, it looks like some of the screws are coming in from the back side. So I'm going to leave the fan and heatsink assembly attached to the motherboard for now. I do see some spots where the tape is kind of stuck to the motherboard, and since we're going to end up separating these, I'm going to go ahead and peel that tape up now so that I don't have to fight with it once I get the motherboard loose. Looks like the antenna connections are right here underneath this little bracket, and I'm going to see if I can remove that so I can get to those antenna leads. Okay, so it's just barely stuck to that little plastic cover, and I'm going to pop up straight up on those antennas. That will remove them from the integrated Wi-Fi card and also allow me to pull up this last piece of tape on this side. I'd rather do that now than when I'm trying to free the motherboard from the case. Okay, so giving a quick look-see, I see around this motherboard there's a bunch of ribbons connected. So I definitely want to remove those. So our object now is to disconnect everything that's connected to the motherboard from the palm rest assembly, so that when I remove those motherboard screws, I'm ready to lift the motherboard out of the case. So speaker connection will just slide straight out. I'm not sure about this board here. That might be connected on the other side of the motherboard, so I'm going to leave that. Got some screws here I'm going to need to remove. So I will go ahead and just flip up on that little retainer there, and then use the little tag here to pull that motherboard ribbon out of the motherboard. And it's always a good idea to flip those back down so they don't get damaged while they're open. Okay, so I will go ahead and remove the motherboard screws. Okay, so I think I got most of the ribbons and screws that need to be removed. So we'll give it one last check and make sure we didn't forget a screw. A lot of times they're easy to miss, and sometimes the manufacturers will actually hide these underneath the black cover. This screw feels like it's retained from the back, so I'm not going to be able to get that one out. So I'll just give the motherboard a gentle wiggle. Make sure it's nice and loose. This one feels like it's loose from the palm rest, okay. Okay, so I'm going to move the motherboard just gently out of the way here. I do see this ribbon goes to this board and then goes to the power button board, and I think I will remove I believe that's the power button here at the same time. Okay, so we got the power button removed. It's just a nice chunk of adhesive there that I was fighting with. So the power button comes out, and the little part that sticks to just pops up and off, and then just remove the ribbon. Okay, so looks like our motherboard should be nice and free. And I do see a lot of the heatsink and fan screws here on the other side. So just the few screws here, and the fan heatsink will detach from the motherboard. And reapply thermal paste or whatever you need to do. But these are where the screws are. So we will come back to that. Alright, so the speakers, it looks like they're just kind of held on by some glue. Bracket here is just a Phillips head screw. So yeah, it looks like there's just a ton of little screws holding on the keyboard, and a few screws right here that are holding on the touchpad. So of course disconnect the ribbon, remove the screws, and whatever tape is in the way, and these parts should be pretty easily replaceable. Alright, so we'll go back to the motherboard, and we're just going to go ahead and remove all of the Phillips screws. Alright, so I think we have the heatsink and fan screws removed. So let's just pop that connector up for the fan ribbon, and we'll work that out of the motherboard, same with the other. And I'll give it a little bit of a wiggle and just see if these parts come apart. Okay, got it free. It just took a little bit of just some wiggling. You don't really want to bend the board, so whatever you do, just be real gentle, and the two should separate. And it looks like that was kind of what was holding it, is a plethora of thermal pads and then some thermal paste for that processor. So it looks like those are just antenna jumpers. Maybe the Wi-Fi antenna is somewhat integrated into the board here, but I don't see. Okay, yeah, they're just jumpers. So that's basically it. So if you're gonna reinstall this assembly, you're gonna need to make sure you keep the thermal pads or use new ones. These ones look like about 1 millimeter thickness. Ooh, maybe 2. Looks like there's a 1 and 2 millimeter thickness. And of course some thermal paste. Alright, so that is basically it. That is how you disassemble most of a Dell XPS 137390 2-in-1 laptop computer. So if this helped you or you found it informative, please like and subscribe. Thank you.